Yeah, it's very strange. I'll have to investigate it later, but I think we're fine to go then if I don't have to have a camera on.
Okay. How did you feel the other day when Jack was butting in all the time?
I feel like people have different temperaments and personalities. I'm not that overly familiar with Jack, so I can't speculate. It seems that you and
Okay.
him have had some interactions before.
Yeah.
But I also don't I don't place a lot of worry necessarily about like civility and that type of thing. And I feel like he was very set on having you answer the question about like why you were asking that question. And then I would assume he felt you were dodging it.
Yeah.
And that's why he got like more heated.
Yeah. Well, I have to with Jack. I just basically have to ignore him because he almost just goes nuts. He goes crazy.
I mean, I've never. So, I mean, I don't watch a lot of your content. I'm not overly familiar with you. I've seen like a couple of clips from you here and there. Either, people on Twitter having referenced a clip of yours, or other people having like referenced a clip or something like that. And then I've been curious when people might talk about something that you said or did. So then I'll go and I'll watch the video if I can find it. And I don't know. I can't speak to Jack's motivations or his temperament necessarily. I do think he came across as like very strong in that conversation. But if there were prior altercations between the two of you, and there's some type of like vendetta there, then
Oh yeah, he definitely doesn't like
maybe.
me. But like if someone was asking me questions and then someone else was butting in and saying don't ask PineCreek that, and that's basically what he did to you. Stop asking Zoe questions. I would say shut up.
Well,
I can handle myself.
I think the concern was more of like what's the motivation for asking the question, because like if a question is essentially going down a road that isn't really getting at the subject at hand, then all of a sudden it might be like shifting the conversation towards something that's only tangential, almost like if it was getting to be kind of meta instead of addressing the subject at hand.
Yeah,
In that case, I could see someone getting frustrated and trying to like focus back on like what the topic actually is.
right. But it's one of those things where I hear what you're saying. That Jack was scared or apprehensive that I was leading the conversation down a road that's tangential and not really to the point or to what we were talking about. But it was what we're talking about, and I can give you very direct answers right now because I know Jack's not around to mute me, so I don't have to walk on eggshells. The point is, my main three issues with trans issues is, and I'll preface it with this: I don't think anybody should do violence to trans people or anybody. I don't think people should bully trans people or anybody. I think people at as much as possible, I know there's differences of opinion, but show respect and civility like anybody. I don't view trans people as any more special or any less special than anybody else when it comes to those three things. But when it comes to specific trans issues, I do not think that minors should be given any drugs or definitely not surgery. When it comes for trans purposes, when it comes to sports and women's spaces, I think males should stay out of it, full stop. So those are two things, but the second thing can be divided into like the sports, into the women's spaces, like changing rooms, and then bathrooms. And I understand it gets very complicated very fast. Then there's other, minor issues like children in schools, having parents having these identities hidden from them, teachers being told not to, or teachers themselves just not telling the parents what's really going on. I'm really against that. And so the reason why I asked you the questions about what makes you think you are a woman, that gets to the subjectivity of it, and just showing that since it's so subjective and it's basically self-ID, according to a lot of people, then you can have a very confused kid, a very confused teenager who thinks one way, and maybe, I don't know, a couple years or even a couple months down the road, they could feel differently. But then in the meantime, be led down a path that might be more hurtful than helpful. So that's a summary of what we could have talked about in that other Discord if Jack wasn't there.
Yeah, and I would have been fine to discuss those topics. I do want to make sure that, is this a one-on-one conversation, or are we?
No, yeah, this is one-on-one.
Everybody piling in.
Yeah, if people are coming in, I see that there's other people in here right now. I'll ask that you remain silent. And if they don't, then I will get Jack in here to enforce the law.
Yeah, sure. What I would say is, I feel like for the most part, your initial statements, I wouldn't take too much of an issue with, but then your later statements start becoming more alarmist about trans people.
Like which later statements?
Talking about if it's also subjective, and then we have people concealing these identities from their parents. That's like, you are asserting there, at least there's an implication, that parents have a right to know about their children's identity.
Yeah, that's my presupposition.
Right, and I disagree with that entirely, because it could be the case, right? It could be the case that it could be dangerous, harmful or even dangerous to the child.
Okay,
for a parent.
I get that. Yeah, I know where you're going with this. I get it. I would say this: the default position ought to be the parents are informed. Are there exceptions? Yes. How's that?
I don't even know if I would say the default position. It depends on, every single circumstance is going to be different, and it's hard to make a general prescription about, especially something like, should parents be informed about a child's identity, because we don't know necessarily what the ramifications are, and if the child is scared to tell their parents, or doesn't want to tell their parents, or isn't ready to tell their parents because they're still working through it themselves, maybe the child hasn't made the decision whether they're going to express this identity or not. So rushing to the parents, all right, might, just in multiple instances, we can easily imagine cases where children are abused, disowned. A majority of homeless children are LGBT children. So we know what the cost could be.
That's not a coincidence, in my opinion. I think one causes the other, not the other way around. So I hear what you're saying, and I can even steelman you in saying that, doing a parallel with the Jehovah's Witnesses, you have two Jehovah's Witness parents and the child's sick and they refuse blood transfusions. At that point, you have to intervene and kind of take the wishes of the parents away. So I get that argument. I understand it. But I would say most parents are not that way. I would say most parents do have the best interests of their child at heart. And when sort of there's this secret being kept from them, I think that's bad. And I also do think that oftentimes the mother and the father can, I shouldn't say often, most of the time, but they can disagree with each other. So on a lot of trans issues, I would also say that especially the father should be involved in making decisions. So if the mother says, yes, our child should transition, the father says no, don't ignore the father, is my opinion. Just don't always go with the yes answer.
I'm not saying that you should necessarily exclude the father from anything. I'm saying that, there's not a requirement to disclose this to the parents. In your example with the Jehovah's Witness, obviously, you're using a more extreme example there, but I'm saying that, you could be disclosing an identity that this child may not even necessarily have. So you're just acting on some assumption, this child said this or is expressing this, but maybe they haven't worked it out for themselves. So then you're essentially forcing them you're outing them, which could be dangerous to them, when that might not even be an identity that they have, but now there's going to be a whole bunch of extra turmoil that follows this. And it's also, you're talking about rushing a process of like self-discovery, and when someone might not be ready to talk about it. So for instance, I'm glad you brought up the Jehovah's Witness, right? Because we could just say, like, what if there was a child who's an atheist, right? You were an atheist, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is like, I'm going to be honest with you, it boggles my mind when I find like atheist communities that are not trans accepting or anything. But we'll get to that, right? We can draw a lot of analogies between having an identity as an atheist. Yeah, I'm going to get there.
It's interesting that it boggles your mind, because can you tell me what trans accepting means? Does that mean agreeing with what some trans people say, or all of what trans people say? Like, can you be accepting of a person and still disagree with them?
When you're saying like what they say or all of it, like those are, first of all, like different things. Of course, you can disagree with somebody about some claims, but when you're talking about their internal sense of identity, their internal sense of self, that becomes a huge problem. And I know that you know this, because when a Christian tells you, and I'm sure that you have debates a lot, or you discuss with Christians, when Christians tell you that you believe in God, and you know you do, then when you say like, no, I don't, I'm an atheist, then they tell you something like, internally, you do accept this. And you're either lying about it, or you are unconsciously, you believe in God, or even subconsciously. But because God has written it on your heart or whatever, it's undeniable. And they just take some presupposition that you must inherently be wrong about your own identity.
I've never been bothered by that.
Okay. Because right now it's only disagreement. And if that's all it was, if people just disagreed with trans people and they just so happen to disagree, then I'd be like, well, I guess I really don't care what PineCreek thinks as far as like, am I actually a woman, right? It wouldn't bother me because it's just a disagreement. But what ends up happening is that right now there's a lot of alarmist rhetoric surrounding trans people. And then people go further to attempt to take legalistic action against us and our entire community to try and deny that we can have access to healthcare.
You know why that alarm is there, right?
Yeah, because there's hysteria that is gripped conservative ideology mainly, but it's also religiously based.
I'll be honest with you,
trans people.
It's more basic than that. Most parents do not want their kids to be trans.
Most parents don't want their kids to be different than they are. Right.
They don't want their kid, their little girl, to become a little boy. They don't want their little boy to become a little girl.
Right.
They want their little girl to grow up and marry a good man and have kids and a white picket fence.
But why would we say that we ought? Like, why would you place any more weight to that when we could easily draw analogies to say, if we look at Pew Research polls, most people in this country, only 4% of people in the United States, 4% report being atheists. Majority of the country are some type of theist. Therefore, you could draw inferences that if most parents want their children to be like them, and most of these parents are theists, and most of these parents think that morality is derived from God or whatever, and a lot of those people may even say that
I'm very much like my father, even though I'm an atheist.
And they may say that, atheists lack morality or whatever. So then they may say, well, I don't want my children to be an atheist. And then you would say like, well, I mean, some people just are atheists. They're just not convinced. Now imagine if those parents, if there was hysteria around baby-eating atheists, then you're like, well, that's just funny. Then all of a sudden, there ends up gaining momentum, like within politics, some group that starts trying to restrict your rights of like where you're allowed to go, where you're allowed to express yourself and stuff as an atheist.
Yeah.
And not only that, but they claim something like you're groomers and you're all pedophiles. And then all of a sudden starts trickling through the news, stories of every couple of months of some theist murdering an atheist. And they claim it's because you must have been a pedophile. That would start worrying you. All right, they're not just disagreeing with you. It's not, well, I just think that you're wrong about God and God has written it on your heart, right? We're taking a claim that is that trivial and then extrapolating it through alarmist rhetoric into becoming an actual like narrative about social contagion. and that atheists are part of what's degenerating society, and that's why we have a lack of morality. And I'm sure you've heard these arguments before from theists, and they're ridiculous when theists say it, and it's just as ridiculous to us when cis people say that about us, especially because we make up, what, 1% of the general population? And then when you talk about trans women, for whatever reason we're inordinately focused on in these rhetoric, we make up even less than that, because most trans people are not necessarily trans women. So we're talking a percentage below 1%.
Hey, so I gotta ask a favor of you. Like, when you start talking, you go on for a while, and that's really hard to respond to everything you're saying because you're saying so much.
Yeah,
But-
I apologize. I do, just like I do have autism, I tend to fully explain something.
Yeah.
If you want me to try to give as succinct answers as possible, then I will. But I feel like you might not get the full scope of the answer then. But go ahead.
Well, and this is no diss on you, because I've had these conversations for probably years now, and so so far you've said nothing I haven't heard before. But each person's different, and I want to get your take. And maybe we need to start at the beginning, where I started with you before. And I'll just ask very short questions, and if you can, try to give me 20-second or shorter answers. I'll ask it a different way than last time. Do you embrace self-ID when it comes to being trans? You're trans because you say so. You believe so.
I feel like that is what constitutes most people's identities on regarding anything.
Okay. So when I say I'm a man, I can, refer to something like my penis, my testicles. And I could even change it a little bit. I say I'm manly because I tend to be a risk taker, and I'm strong on the bench press, something like that. Is there, besides self-ID, is there anything like that makes you think you're a woman?
Right. So what you just did was you appealed to some type of descriptive facts about you. You're like, you have a penis, and then you also, in your mind, you act manly. What does acting manly mean?
I just said, let's say taking risks. Men tend to take more risks than women, so I'm a risk taker.
Don't women take risks?
Of course. Did you hear what I said? That men tend to take more risks than women.
Okay, could you find some women that take more risks than some men?
Yes. But
right,
as I
so
said,
that
on
wouldn't
average, men take more risks than women.
Right, but that's not unique to being a manly then.
Right. I'm just giving a whole bunch of criteria. And so I could go on to other things, like because I have testosterone in me, I tend to lose my hair. I tend to be stronger on the bench press than the average woman. That sort of thing. So I'll ask the same question again. Besides the self-ID, just thinking that you're a woman, believing you're a woman, is there anything else like that little markers that we can point to that says you're a woman?
Yeah, we would say that when we're talking in general about gender, such as man and woman and this type of thing, we're talking about social categories, typically social archetypes. So you might say the social archetype associated with females as woman.
Can you give an example?
And I recognize that when people use those tropes or they're talking about those properties, and those experiences, they're also describing someone like me. And you might say that, well, you are manly. Then I would just say, okay, fine, I'm womanly.
Right. Give me an example of womanly. I gave you one of bench press.
Right.
Give me
so
one.
If you say you bench press, I can just say, well, I don't really bench press.
Okay. So one of the things that makes you think you're a woman is because you're weak?
No. I would say there are archetypes socially that we talk about when we talk about social archetypes of females, and these are going to be you can look at Jungian models if you want to, but typically speaking, it's going to be a loose collection of traits that are going to
give me
be
some,
things
please.
softness, kindness, right? Caring for
Kindness.
others. Yeah.
Caring.
Mothering people, like all these sorts of things.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Right?
Mothering. Anything else you want to throw in there?
No, I'm not going to make a non-exhaustive list, because what's going to happen is, at the end of the day, all of these things are culturally. That's how we're contextualizing them, is within the time and culture in which they occur.
Zoe, now remember when I mentioned risk taking, then you said, couldn't there be some women that take risks? Couldn't there be some women who maybe even take more risks than you, Doug? And I said yes, but I brought it back to the averages. So I can point to a very someone born with a penis and testicles, XY chromosomes, who's very soft, very kind, very caring, very mothering, even very nurturing, but still identifies as a man and not a woman. How do you explain that?
Because it's not a problem for my model. That would be based on identity, your internal sense of self.
Right. So it's all self-ID, isn't it? It's just a belief you have in your head.
No. I already stated this at the beginning, and this is why I find it strange for you to have to ask these questions. I've already said, as far as I can tell, most identity does seem to be what people just associate with. Can you give me an example of how you would form identity that is not associations, that's not based on your experiences? So without appealing to your experience,
no.
Without appealing to an internalist model, can you come up with identity?
No, I think it is based on your social experience. So one reason why you might be a male who thinks you're a woman is because maybe your mother hated men growing up, and she gave these social cues to you throughout your childhood, and so now when you get older, you kind of don't want to be a man because your mother hated men. Like, I'm not saying this is the case for you, but I'm saying that would be an example of how one's identity is formed. Do you agree?
It depends on what your view of identity is. Is that your view of identity?
That's one way how identity can be formed, yes.
Okay, so then if it could be based on your experiences, then you could come up with some hypothetical situation, because if we're talking about like a possible world, is it possible that someone forms an identity based on whatever? As long as it doesn't violate logic, then I suppose it's possible. Okay,
so now what makes you think you're a woman? What specific things, like you mentioned the softness, the kindness, the caring, the mothering, but yet I can give you the counterfactual that there's many men that are very nurturing, very caring, very kind, very soft, not strong physically, but still identify as a man, but yet you identify as a woman. And I'm asking, why do you think that is?
Because those are sufficient conditions to identify as a woman, but not the necessary condition.
What do you think the necessary condition is for you?
There is no necessary condition.
What do you think some conditions are for you? Because given the answers you gave me when I asked you to be specific, softer, kinder, caring, mothering, nurturing,
right,
and yet
the same way they are for you, based on my internal sense of experience, and then through an externalist sense of viewing these like traits and tropes that are associated with these social roles. I know that when people are talking about women, they are describing someone like me. And when they are describing someone as a man, and I look at socially what they're talking about, they're not talking about someone like me. This has been so much the case, Doug, that you had asked me before if I transitioned as a child with puberty blockers and stuff, and I told you that no, I did not. Mm-hmm. All right, it's been such the case in my life that even when I was attempting to pass as a man, I had coworkers that got close to me over a period of years, and they would make strange comments to me, like they didn't really think of me as a man, or sometimes they would say, "You are very womanly."
Mm-hmm. Because of the way you acted.
So even people, but I'm saying that I wasn't acting in a way that's like flamboyant. Like I wasn't talking like I don't know. However, you imagine like a stereotypical, effeminate
gay guy
man may act. Right. I wasn't acting in a way that convinced people that I was like a gay man, even though I was.
Well, I'm not saying you're consciously acting.
I was dating.
Yeah, but
right.
But again, like I know many gay guys, or some gay guys, who sounds like you are like, but they don't say that they're a woman. So I'm trying to figure out what makes you different.
Right. Because they don't. The difference is that they don't identify as a woman.
Right. So it's basically, you say you're a woman because you say you're a woman, right?
No, I've already agreed that what makes my identity is the same thing that makes your identity. You've already taken the same position. You're just applying skepticism when you repeat it back to me for some reason. Because I haven't said it's just that you identify this way. When you say identify, right? It sounds like you're trying to deflate this to, oh, you just identify, when I've already said you would have, it's based on your phenomenological experiences that you have as a person. And then you're taking an internalist view, all right? And you can use metacognition to think about the way that you're thinking, or think about the way that you consider things, right? And recognize that there's something different about you than other people, that the roles that would normally be correlated between you and another person. And all of a sudden, when people are talking about some group, they are talking about you. And if you need an analogy to this, all right, it would be like if someone said, I'm talking to a middle-aged man, and I'm talking about middle-aged men in general. Depending on whether you have the identity of being a middle-aged man or not, will depend on whether you think I'm talking about you or not. Now, there is some point in your life, if you are a man of sufficient age, you will probably identify as middle-aged. Now, is there a strict delineation between the necessary condition for you to be middle-aged to define yourself that way? I don't know if we can find that. What we would say is, it just seems to be the case that people accept, they take on the identity, like, oh yeah, I am middle-aged. Then if I said, well, at what point did you become middle-aged? You could just draw a line at a certain age and be like, well, I guess this age would be the cutoff.
You're doing it again, Zoe. You're starting to ramble.
It's an analogy. Did you pick up the analogy?
Yeah, you're basically saying that sometimes it's fuzzy around the edges. Like at middle age, does it start at 30 or 35 or 40? I get it. But it's definitely not, the extremes are, it's definitely not 1 year old or 99 years old, right?
I don't know if a 1-year-old even has an identity, right?
Well, we're talking about whether or not they're middle-aged or not.
And I've also listened to old people tell me things like, I'm actually like, a child at heart. And they don't mean that they think that they are literally a child, but they mean that they tend to act much younger socially than would be expected for someone their age.
Would you concede or agree that there's no scientific method of determining if someone's trans or not?
Why would we need a scientific method for that?
I'm not asking you why we need one. I'm asking you, would you agree that there is none?
I don't know if that even makes sense. Science is a methodology, right? Testing things empirically. Unless you're going to claim that identity is an empirical thing, but you said it's based on phenomenological experiences, which would not be an empirical thing.
So you would say being trans is more like having Christ live in you. It's just something you can't test in a test tube.
No, having an identity would be like identifying as an atheist. I don't think you can put atheism in a beaker and prove that someone's an atheist.
Right. You cannot put it in a beaker and prove that someone's an atheist. I got it. So it is a non-empirical claim, correct? Having
an identity seems like it would be non-empirical. What we would probably look for is more of like commitments to it, and and ascension to the proposition.
So now when it comes to one of my main issues, let's say giving puberty blockers to teenagers, since identity is a non-empirical claim, and would you agree that teenagers tend to be confused in general about all things, not just their identity, but I mean, what's good for them?
Use the word all. You use the word all there again. I don't think teenagers are confused about all things now.
Did I use the word all?
You did.
I thought, okay. Do you agree that teenagers in general tend to be confused about things?
Some things, sure.
But not identity?
It depends. There are different types of identity, right?
Like, we could even go further earlier than teenage years, like a 4-year-old who thinks they're Superman or Spider-Man. They're not really Spider-Man, right?
Of course not.
Of course not. But what if they truly non-empirically identify as Spider-Man? We still would say, no, you're not Spider-Man. Right?
I don't see what this has to do with gender.
Well, so in other words, your identity could be one of a woman. Now, this gets down to definitions, which we can talk about. Just because you identify as a woman doesn't make you one, right? Or no?
No, I would disagree with that.
Okay.
Identifying as a woman does make you a woman if you have that identity. Now,
okay,
to answer your question,
that's a major disagreement between us. But you would say there's limits to that, right? Like if I identify as a tree, you would not say I'm a tree. Or if I identify as African American, would you say I'm African American?
Do you know what like categorical errors are?
Yeah, Christians use it, especially precepts. They use it against me all the time. That's a category error.
Right. So if we're talking about gender, like gender is a different category of experience than like race is, right?
Right. It's let's say I was raised in an African American home, but I look like the way I look. And I say I identify as African American or black. Would that be correct?
So I'll be honest with you. One of the things I find frustrating having conversations with people who seem to be good faith at the start is the moment we start getting into it and we start getting to the position like where we're getting to the nuance and the heart of it, they deflect to something like race. Or they'll ask something like, can I identify as a cat? When that's not what trans people are doing, right? We're talking about the exact same social construct that you identify with, right? We're talking about socially archetypical roles that, again, typically are associated with females or males. That's the subject that we're talking about. And it would be very frustrating to you, I'm sure, if you were trying to discuss some aspect of religion and you're going to talk about the ontology of God. And then once you start getting closer and closer to the heart of it, the person spins around and starts wanting to talk about how you don't have any morality because you're an atheist. That would be incredibly frustrating. Could we stick to the subject? I don't want to talk about transracialism. I have no interest in that subject.
That's fine.
And I'm not talking about transspeciesism, right? I want to talk about gender. That's why I agreed to this.
How many
Zoe, can I ask?
No, Sean, quiet.
Oh, I got a good one though, Doug.
No.
So can we reframe this real quick to get back on?
The reason why, Sean, you just got here, and before you got here, and for people who just got here, Zoe asked specifically that, well, I think you asked this, right, Zoe, or implied it, that it should be just one-on-one, right?
When you had asked me over here, you had said that you wanted to have a one-on-one conversation, and that's what I figured it was going to be.
Yeah, so we're going to keep it one-on-one, Sean. Sorry for snapping at you, but I didn't actually know it was you at first.
No, I got it.
But
I got it.
Where were we? Yeah, okay. I'll do what you say, Zoe, and I will not bring up transracialism or transspeciesism and all that stuff. But I do think, let's get to our fundamental disagreement. I do think that, especially about the things that are important to me, that whether one identifies as a man or a woman, I do think it has to be, at least in some cases, linked to something that's more objective than subjective. And for the reasons that I mentioned, but when it comes to women's spaces, women's sports, and medication and so forth. And I'll be very honest with you. My son is in the theater arts, and as I don't know if you know or not, but people who are in the theater arts program tend to be more likely to be non-binary, to be gay, to be trans, to be whole sorts of things. And in his freshman year, get this though, in his freshman year, well, I forget the exact numbers, but it was quite a bit. It was like over 20 or so, close to 20 people identified as either trans or non-binary. By their senior year, he's now gone through all 4 years, graduated, none of them are. None. They started freshman year as being trans, and by the senior year, they weren't. So now let me ask you this. Do you believe your identity, that in 4 years from now, you could identify as a man?
I don't hold any beliefs at all. I find that to be unlikely the case, though. And I would also say that,
But it's
you're appealing to
possible.
anecdotes. I don't know.
You don't know if it's possible.
I would
Okay.
say very unlikely, although if we're granting things like logic is true, right? Then we would say that something like in a hypothetical possible world scenario, that it's not an impossibility. So I would have to grant that something like that.
Do you know of anybody or have heard of anybody that has identified as trans? So let's say in your case, trans woman, and then years later or even months later, don't and identify as a man. Do you know anybody like that?
In the same way that I know people that identified as a man and did not identify as trans, and then months later identified as a woman and was.
So it can go back and forth. Like you've heard of that happening, of people going back and forth. Yes? Zoe, I can't hear you if you're talking. I hope we haven't lost Zoe. I see you're still here, Zoe, but I can't hear you.
I can't hear either if it helps.
The reason why I bring this up, Zoe, if you can hear me and I can't hear you, and maybe you just can't talk right now, is that if you say you're a woman to me based on this metaphysical identity concept, then I could just say to you, you're a woman for now.
Can you hear us?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, my Discord crashed. Can you repeat back the last statement you said?
Yeah. So if it's at least possible, and if you know of stories at least of people being trans women and then not years later, and vice versa, being just cis and then being trans, then, and since identity is not tied to anything empirical, then I could say to you, well, you call yourself a woman today, but it might not be that case years from now. So you're a trans woman for now. Whereas under my definition, no, that won't change. Would you agree with that?
Right, but the problem is that that's not a problem with my view, because that is my view, is that people can change their gender identity as they go. It would be a problem for your view if it is the case that can happen, because you would be saying like, well, no, they would only be like a man or a woman, and the problem is we never even got to talk through definitions and stuff at the very beginning, right? So like, and it also seemed that you were trying to apply some type of objective standard, like to ontology about human beings, which is a very strange thing to do. In my opinion, for an atheist, that's a very religious thing.
Are you putting me in a box?
No, I'm saying that.
Don't
that
you know
behavior,
all atheists are fluid in their ideas and beliefs?
I mean, I feel like all of us have a lot of fluid in us, mostly blood, but
yeah, well, mostly water.
I might have some gender fluid as well, but I feel like these conversations get very like heated and contentious, and at the end of the day, at the heart of it, the problem is that you might have some type of presupposition that you're going to hold to, and I feel that when you talk to someone like me, the way that I view the subject, at least, I feel like I can offer a better explanation about what we experience and see in the actual world, and not just sticking to some type of dogma about ontology or something like that. That cannot account for the facts, unless you just have to say that people are mistaken or lying, just like certain Christians would say atheists are. Yeah, the atheists are lying, confused, or mistaken. They must all believe in God, and you wouldn't accept that, and you'd be like, well, that doesn't seem to account for the facts of reality, where people do identify as atheists and can reject the proposition of God. And I'm saying that.
Zoe will be back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think my model can explain things pretty well. Like we haven't talked specifically about definitions, but I think we kind of have indirectly. Like under my model, you're a man. Let me ask you this: are you male?
I would categorically be best probably described as intersex, I would think.
Oh, are you intersex? Have you been tested?
No, that's why I said it would best describe it, but I don't know at the end of the day.
Okay, I'm going to be crude here. It will, for me and you, it probably won't be crude, but for other people listening, it might be. But do you have a penis?
So,
do you have testicles? So
I understand.
Under my
I
definition,
understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Right.
I have actually been genetically tested because my wife and I were infertile, and so that was part of the testing. So, for example, I have a penis, I have testicles, I am XY chromosomed. I make small gametes called sperm, although not too much, and that's why I had to do IVF. And so I have something empirical that I can kind of look to say I'm a man. And then there's the other features that we talked about already, like me being risk-taking and strong and that sort of thing, aggressive. So not only am I a man, I'm manly. See, and I would say that you're a man, but maybe not manly. So
okay,
yeah, so
well,
I'm using it in two tenses.
Right. So I have a penis and I have breasts.
Okay. And you have breasts because you implanted them, or because you think you're intersex?
No, they're my breasts.
Like, I know men who have breasts too, but don't call themselves a woman. In fact, Sean here made a joke to me one time that I had breasts because I was a little bit overweight. Are you overweight?
No.
Okay. I'm
I'm not overweight, and I definitely have like the breasts that you would typically associate with women.
Okay, so I'm surprised you haven't been tested to see if you're intersex yet or not. Because you might.
I mean, why would I pay for that? I'm not trying to have kids. Like, number one, and number two, that test is very expensive if it's not covered by insurance, and insurance only covers it for those reasons. But no, I've not been tested.
I don't
so
think
like
it's expensive.
when I say
$100 maybe.
no, it's more expensive than that. But
you haven't been
at
curious?
the end of the day,
I'd be curious if I were you.
What would it matter? On my view, I don't care.
Explain why you have breasts.
It wouldn't matter. Like, I'm also taking HRT, so that probably has something to do with it as well.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, okay, that explains it. Okay, but under my model, for example, like you said, explanatory factor, like you already mentioned autism, and having autism, I think people who are trans are 6 times more likely to be autistic, or the other way around. So that could explain why you identify the way you do. Are you a child of divorced parents?
No.
Okay. And
see, this is where we're getting into the weird like speculation about why.
Well, I don't think it's weird. I think it's interesting.
The reason why it's weird is because for all the cases that you bring up of like, oh well, there's a lot of correlation between trans people being autistic. Then we would just say, okay, are the majority of autistic people trans? And we find that no, they're not. So couldn't I just say extrapolate the data and say it just seems that autism
I'm not sure that's true.
is related to like, yeah, it is. Most autistic people are not trans.
Oh no, yeah, you're right. I'm going the other way around. But most trans people are autistic.
No, not most. There's just
I think it is.
a large. It's not most. It's just a large enough percentage.
It's not 51%.
That it warrants some investigation.
Okay.
But the thing is, like, just because let's say we're neurodivergent, but under your view, you would say that, oh well, that must be why. But it just could be the case that neurodivergent people, we tend to like look inside and do a lot of reckoning about our internal sense of self. We think a lot about our thinking. We do might take a lot of consider metacognition and stuff, or metaethics a lot. Autistic people also tend to be very moral like people. Like, we have strong opinions about morality because we consider metaethics a lot and not just applied ethics. But
how old were you? Like, when I talk to Christians who have beliefs, and you've already admitted that this is not an empirical claim, being trans, and I often ask Christians, when did you become a Christian? When did you become trans?
Like, actually take on the label as trans, or like
when you
when
kind
was
of
I
thought
expressing?
that, when you took on the label, let's say for now, because that's simple.
Accepting the label was probably around, let's see, I think we're
Teenager?
I think 4 years ago. We were 34 is when we like actually came out to everyone as trans.
Oh, so you're a late bloomer. 30
No,
years,
not necessarily.
4 years ago would
Yeah,
make you around 30?
34.
Or 34?
I think we're yeah, I can't remember how old we are, but somewhere around there.
So when you were 20, you weren't calling yourself a woman, right?
I have a very I'm going to just be a unfortunately I'm going to be an atypical example for you to use. Like the problem is that, and I know we had touched on this a little bit, but I had been expressing like these thoughts and feelings very early on, and there was a lot of severe abuse that I suffered as a result of that.
By
So that
whom?
ended up, well, by my mother, but that ended up having us be like repressed for a long time and kind of like hide in the closet. And then I tried to come out again as a teenager, and I lost most of my friends. And there was again a lot of
I want to make sure I understand. Come out as a teenager as what? As gay or as trans?
well, at the time I was trans, but I was too afraid to tell people that I was trans because I figured they would probably kill me based on like the things that people had said around me.
Okay, so the concept of transness, being trans, was in your head when you were a teenager, or was it just being gay?
No, it was being
Because you're
trans was
older.
definitely there.
We're talking the 90s, right?
Yeah, I was 19 at the time that I had said I confessed to a friend of mine that I was like, see, this is like we're just getting very personal. Anyway,
Well,
I was
understand.
19 and I was 19 and I was open about it. When I was like 12, like 11 or 12, my father had asked me like if I wished I had been born a woman because of all the gender issues that I was having. All right, so like this is something that has been a reoccurring, we'll say, issue of repression, abuse, and kind of hiding this for like a lot of my life. And this is where I get really mad when I hear people saying, well, this is just social contagion, because they don't consider the immense amount of pressure you have as a trans person not to be open with who you are because of the abuse, because of the threats, because of losing your family and losing your friends. I had a friend try and get me fired from my job by going to there and telling everybody that, about my issues. And like, that's what ends up happening when you have a culture around you in a society where people are not validating, not accepting, and abuse you over this and or threaten you.
Like your father abused you?
No, he was very kind and loving.
But your mother did.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Like, and was it your mother? Well, okay, you don't want to talk about it. That's fine. But
I don't want to talk about the specifics of it.
Because I think in a different, maybe, I'll take it off you. So we got a person who's in their teenage years and they're in a family, and the mother says, "You're not a girl, you're a boy," and basically doesn't affirm anything at all, but basically is always negative, negative, negative. Instead of, let's say, the mother who would say, "Oh yeah, you're a boy, that's fine, and you like doing this that are typically girl things. That's totally fine." I can understand why it kind of feeds upon itself, because then the person feels insecure about who they are, constantly kind of hiding who they really are, instead of their own parents, who their parents are supposed to love their child the most. Doesn't kind of say you're safe, you're fine, we love you no matter what. And I think a lot of times that abuse can lead to confusion, And yeah, I think a lot of people, if they were under different parents, they wouldn't be trans today. I truly believe that.
And see, that's just strange. And it's a strange thing for you to believe.
No,
because
it's not strange because you
I
yourself
had,
admitted this.
No, I had the opposite. The opposite happened to us. So,
What?
like, I can go even further back of like teachers having issues with us, like pre-kindergarten, right? We're in like preschool, trying to get us to play with like what they were calling like boys' toys as opposed to like girls' toys and this type of thing.
Right.
And our mother was putting heavy pressure on us to be a boy, to not play with girl toys, and to stop requesting like girl toys. And like it just sounds cringe because this is like the stereotypical thing that I know people are looking for when they want to medicalize being trans. The thing is, it's like I had these experiences. I desired like girls' clothing and stuff, like because I recognized early on like I'm a girl, not a boy. But my mother was very invalidating and stuff, and my dad was like, while he wouldn't go and buy me like girl things after some point because it just was causing too much contention, he pretty much had a like trying to support me, but in a sense of like encouraging me to like boy things, like trying to suggest that I consider playing sports, or I should play football, or I should do, I should go and hang out with like, I should associate with other boys my age and make friends or whatever. Like he was trying very much to just be supportive. But unfortunately, like around the time that I got old enough to start like really expressing these feelings, and like he felt like he should ask me about this because there's just a lot of obvious things going on. He ended up dying like right after that.
Of natural
so I
causes?
didn't have that.
How old were you?
How old was I when that happened?
Yeah, when your dad died.
Young.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that. I mean, whenever someone loses their parents young, or their parents lose their children young, that's just horrific.
Right. So then I was left with my mother, who was not validating and very much wanted me to be a boy. To her, it was a bad thing for me to want to be a girl. She was very invalidating to me about this.
Right. She was not the mother I was describing she ought to be. Like, remember, affirming and saying it's okay to be a boy and play with dolls or whatever.
Right. No, I'm saying like that was her view, was that playing with these dolls and wanting these things and that sort of stuff doesn't make me a girl. So like it's okay for me to want some of these things, but I'm still a boy and I should do boy things and I should play with boys and I should stop, hanging out with girls or making girlfriends and stuff when I was in like grade school, because. And I mean, she was right to some extent as far as like bullying and stuff that was, would come later. But that wouldn't be until like, we started getting old enough for boys and girls to like have that weird, I don't know, grudge or something. Like girls have cooties or something is what boys would say. And it confused us a lot. Like I wasn't sure what they were talking about, but that could be neurodivergence,
Like if it was you're describing some of your life in the 1990s. If it were the 1890s, do you think you'd be trans? I say no. I think you would just label yourself a very feminine man who's gay, probably. I don't even know your proclivities, but do you think I'm wrong with that? That we go back a century? If
you talk about like the historicity of this type of stuff, like obviously you're going to find a problem because like the language like trans, I don't even know if that word was coined, right?
Sorry, you're right. But I don't think in 1890 there were a lot. Maybe there were some, but I don't think there was a lot of people saying I'm actually a man trapped in a woman's body, or vice versa.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm not going to go. This is going to be a problem. All right. And it's not a problem for me in the sense of like, oh no, there's not these people. There were these people. The problem is, and like maybe you care about this or you don't, but we're looking through this, at least gender issues, through like a Western lens, right? At least you and I are, in our current culture. If we look back in time and I try to identify anyone as like, oh yeah, these people would probably be trans or whatever, I'm going to be projecting my Western lens, especially like a Western white lens, onto these ancient
What
cultures.
does white have anything to do with it?
I'm saying because there are concepts, there's like intersections as far as like what our understanding of gender is. So like,
No, but gender is colorblind, right?
no, it's not. It's I would say it's emergent, and you'd have to take it like into consideration at intersections with things like race, only because when you talk about like social archetypical, roles that are associated with like men or males and females, this also is impacted by race, and people are going to have certain expectations for like social archetypical expressions of femininity of like black females as opposed to white females. And we know this is the case in the way that people, like white people, tend to, for whatever reason, think that like archetypically black women might be more masculine than white women, who they treat as more feminine. And like, I don't want to.
I'm married to a black woman, and she's very feminine. I've never viewed black women as more, on average, masculine. I don't know.
Right, but that's your anecdote, right? We can look at issues within like academia and like sociology and stuff. So like this is a thing that happens. You
didn't take critical theory in university, did you?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm only saying this because when I try to point to any group of people and I say these people would have been trans, the first problem is that label didn't exist back then, so we don't know. The second issue is that a lot of times people within those cultures might associate other beliefs or even like religiosity or something with this, right? Like two-spirit native people. Two-spirit native people may or may not be trans. Even currently, just because they're two-spirit does not necessarily mean that they are trans. It's just that it is the case that a lot of two-spirit people are trans. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Would you view yourself as a two-spirit person?
No, I'm not native, and I don't follow those like religious practices.
Do you view yourself as someone born in the wrong body?
I don't know what that means. You're born in the body that you're born in.
Do you wish you were born as a woman with a vagina and breasts through puberty and all that stuff?
For a question like that, unfortunately, and it's going to frustrate you, I'd have to say I don't know. Because if it were the case that I were born that way, it would alter like all these other experiences and stuff that I've had. And for the most part, I am a pretty happy person. I enjoy my life despite the immense amount of suffering that has gone on in it. And I find that the sources of contention currently are mostly like political and social, from people that are like trying to take my rights away or trying to be alarmist about trans people and thus like make it dangerous for me to like go out places.
Because like you said earlier that your father asked you that question I just asked you. I think you said I don't know, born in the wrong body is the right phrase that your father asked you, but something to that effect.
Yeah, he asked me if I wished I'd been born a woman.
And what did you say to him?
I got up and I walked away. I didn't answer the question.
Why didn't you answer his question?
Because I don't know if I can make an honest assessment of that. I don't know like what that would mean for me. So I could say I wish that I was born cis. That way, I wouldn't have to have surgeries, and I wouldn't have to take HRT and all this other kind of stuff. And socially, I'd be way more accepted, and people would just be like more polite to me in general. And all of a sudden, I would be granted some magical ontology that makes my identity secure. Whereas
if you were born in a different body, you would be cis. Right?
That's what I'm saying. Right. I would be cis in that case.
And you would, do you desire to be cis?
I don't know. I'm happy being trans. So I don't know, I don't know if I would be happier as being cis. I could be happy as cis, or I could be happy as trans.
Okay, so right now you're happy as trans.
Yes, I am happy
except
as
for
a
the
woman.
Political stuff, I thought you said.
Yeah.
So what's the
like naturally.
Let's shift to the stuff that really matters in society. What's the political stuff that you're unhappy with?
Things that like Trump would advocate via stuff like Project 2025, talking about banning healthcare for trans people like universally, so that not only do they want to ban puberty blockers and they want to ban transition for children, their goal is to ban HRT for anyone of any age. And I don't see why I, as an adult, should not be able to get the healthcare that I desire.
Is there anything right now stopping you? Like, what state are you in?
I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
I'll say I'm in the southern United States.
Okay. Now, as far as I know, at least some of the legislation that's already been passed, it's banning HRT puberty blockers for teenagers, not for adults. Am I wrong?
No, they're planning on banning it for adults. Like, there's a video of Trump talking about this when he was asked directly about it, and he said that his goal was, should he get elected president and he's able to do the things that he wants to do, like replace these judges and stuff, he was saying on like day one, this is his agenda. And one of the things that he was talking about was,
and I'm pretty up on the news, I've never heard Trump say that.
I mean, I can, if you give me a minute to go to Twitter, I can go find the video and link it, because this is something that people say all the time. But here's the thing. I just want to ask you this, because it might be a waste of time otherwise. Mm-hmm. If you were saying that, well, I'm not aware of Trump saying this, whatever, and then I send you a video, would that change your mind about anything? Would you be like, okay, I'm not going to vote for Trump because like he legitimately is trying to like stop trans people from getting health care? Or would you just say like, no, it's not really a problem if he does this anyway?
Yeah, it would not change my mind on who I'm voting for, but it would change my mind on, I disagree with him here then. Like I tend to be more libertarian as for adults, but again, with exceptions. And so if an adult wants to take HRT, like I'd say not most, a heck of a lot of men take HRT in their 60s. And I don't think Trump is going to say, I ban that. Like Joe Rogan, for example, takes testosterone. You think, is that what you're saying?
They're carving out qualifiers for trans people. No, they're carving out qualifiers for trans people. They're not saying that it's going to be universally banned. They're saying it's banned for trans people.
Okay.
It's not going to be banned for cis people.
And Trump said that on day one he would implement that.
Yeah, that would be part of his agenda on day one. And the issue is that I have relatives and stuff, and I know this is an anecdote, right? I'm not trying to be like anecdotal Allison here, but I'm just saying that I know people that have gone to the doctor, and if they are cis, they'll be like, oh, it seems that your hormone levels are a little bit off, or it seems that you're not, they're not feeling quite as well, whatever. And they'll just say, oh, well, maybe we should put you on like an HRT regimen. Like maybe we should give you some estrogen. Or if they're a cis man, I had a guy that I talked to at my last job, and he was like, oh yeah, I wasn't feeling very well, I wasn't feeling very energetic and stuff. My doctor tested my testosterone. My testosterone was a little bit lower, so I'm on. He's taking HRT like testosterone now, and like it's that easy for them to get access to this stuff. Nobody even like blinks an eye or questions it, because well, if that's a cis man, we're just going to give him testosterone. But if it was a trans person, there are people that would say that, oh, well, all of a sudden we're going to call in to question your mental health, that there might be something wrong with you. Should we even give you access to this? So I don't know. It's wild. A different standard there.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you want to.
Sorry, can I say something about that?
Yeah, very quickly.
Okay, I just want to say that the medical decisions in this country are determined largely by CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid. So it's not really ever was between you and your doctor, because it's between you, your doctor, and your doctor's license, which is going to be pulled if they do something against CMS's wishes. So I think it's always been more complicated than just it's between you and your doctor and whatever you decide, because it's not.
Yeah,
it's always going to be more complicated. It's always going to be more nuanced. I think we all would agree.
Zoe, if Trump did indeed say that for all ages, and I personally have never heard that come out of his mouth, even if, I don't know if you have him quoted in an article, but if you have it on audio, then I'll accept it. But I would just disagree with him. But I do think that it should, in my opinion, be banned for teenagers and younger. So is there any other political stuff? Like my view on healthcare is that the government should stay out of all healthcare, no matter if you're trans, cis, or whatever. If you can afford to pay for an elective surgery, then feel free if you're an adult.
Well, is there a place where I can post this real quick for you?
Yeah, in the chat part of Poof.
Are you uploading a file or posting a link?
I am posting a link to a website.
Cool, should be good.
There you go.
Okay, thanks.
He said that June 30th. So I tend to agree as far as like the government and healthcare. So I think the government needs to regulate healthcare, because like I don't think we want medicines that are not tested for quality or any of that type of stuff, right? Like you would agree at least to that.
I'm sorry, I was reading your article, but ask again. Regulations. I'm for some regulations in healthcare, if that's your question.
Yeah. So let's just say, so you agree that trans people ought to be able to get HRT if they desire it, right?
As adults.
And you're saying that you're just going to draw a line, right, between adults and...
Yeah, and part
when
of the
you
reason...
say adults, how are you defining adult here?
Yeah, this is similar to your middle age question. When does it start? Legally in this country, you kind of have to start at age 18. But in my opinion, I think, especially on these issues of this fuzzy identity stuff where people can be confused, I would wait till your prefrontal cortex is fully developed in your mid to late 20s, which is, for you, like you're a late bloomer, so I would have no problem with you at all.
But that's not... So my issue with this isn't...
with
Oh my God.
Yeah, just everybody be quiet for now. Okay, go ahead, Zoe.
So my issue isn't that, that these policies are going to affect me, right? I'm concerned about like other trans people essentially being able to access healthcare. And I know the type of damage that all the repression and the time that like we spent in the closet like has done to us. And I don't want any other people to have to like suffer those types of things. And I think that there's no reason to deny them their healthcare, especially on something like an internal sense of self, their identity, which we know is pretty solid from an early age.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to do what I do with theists sometimes, is try to steelman the other side. Why do you think why it might be a good idea to have this type of restriction for trans teenagers, let's say?
So your concern, as far as I understand, is that because they may change their mind and you think that identity, especially like trans identity, is somehow very permeable, that they may end up engaging in procedures that they later regret, and that if they had just waited long enough, they would realize that they are not actually trans and they do not need access to that care. So you're trying to prevent possible damage from being done to them. Very
good. I really appreciate you doing that. Now, let's say that that's true only 1% of the time. We still want to help that 1%, right?
Right, but we wouldn't sacrifice 99% of people to save 1%. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't, because...
Wait, hold on. I just, that answer, all right? I don't think you believe that. And
no, I do.
I just want to... okay.
And you know why? Because all I'm asking them is to wait a little longer.
Okay, and this is why you don't, right? So I'll give you an example, a counter example, and see if you still hold your position.
Okay.
Cancer treatment. 99% of the time it helps the patient. 1% of the time it hurts or kills them.
Okay.
Should we treat cancer?
Yes.
Okay. So then your standard for, well,
you
if it benefits...
should not have brought up cancer. You know why? Here's why you should.
Because
Here's why you.
it's an empirical thing.
Yes. See, you're smart. You know where I'm going with this, because I can imagine a doctor who loves Trump, is mega proud. Okay, and imagine a doctor who's like a hippie, and they come upon a stage 4 cancer patient who needs chemo. They're going to agree on the diagnosis. Try doing that with trans.
So when it comes to trans people, and I know that when we say like empirical, like there's not empirics on it. The empirics that we're talking about would be like, there's no physical thing that you just point to, like, oh, you've got, a trans gene here, and that's what makes you trans. But we can look at like sociology, psychology, and these types of things. There are fields that we can generate predictive models about someone's identity, or we can say,
Really?
if a person, you would say if a person, has these commitments toward this ideology, what are some of the things that we would expect to see?
Okay,
Now,
so I could give you a chart. So what you're saying in theory is you could give a chart without using the words trans or let's say gay or whatever, and you think psychologists could line up the chart with the person with any type of consistency? So in other words,
I would say that
a guy who likes cross-dressing, likes hanging out with women, a guy who is very feminine and nurturing. You're telling me you could that psychologists could say, oh, this person's trans. No, this person's just a cross-dresser who's not trans. This person is just a feminine male. You think they could do that with consistency?
No, you're just talking about basic statistical inference. Unlike if someone is engaging,
I'm
these
saying they'd be all over the map. They'd be flying blind.
They wouldn't. If part of this process is having the person state what their commitments are and having them assent to propositions about their identity, I feel like you could predict which people are trans and which people are gay, straight, atheist, Christian. I feel like you could predict that very strongly by the propositions that they're going to assent to about their identity, see the commitments that they have, and then if they can follow that through with expression.
I could describe a person who's just like you, Zoe, who does not call themselves a woman.
Right, and I could describe a person just like you who does not call themselves a man.
Well, no, then they're not just like me.
Well, if they're not calling themselves a woman, then they would not be like me. Right. If they are just like me and they don't call themselves a woman, like they don't identify as a woman,
because of definitions.
They are not like me.
But I'm saying someone could even share your same definition and you could have these differences, where someone who has my definition can't because it's based on something more empirical.
No, that's not true. It's based on identity. So if somebody, all you're saying is if somebody identifies as a woman, then they don't identify as a man. We both agree on that.
So if I was a faker, let's say I wanted to fool a psychologist into thinking I'm trans. So I let's say I'm 13, 14, 15 years old, but I have my evil brain that I have now, and I go into a psychologist's office and I say, I'm trans. And what makes you think you're trans? I just have this identity. I'm a woman. Do you think I could fool a psychologist into thinking I'm trans?
Do liars exist? Yes.
Okay.
And can people be persuaded or deceived? Yes.
Okay. So how do we figure out who's trans and who's not? If
we would probably look at their assent to certain claims about their identity. Then we would also be looking for experiences that they have, which is like something that they ask you about. Like I know that for whatever reason, people think that you could just go to a doctor and be like, hey, I'm trans. And they're just like, okay, yeah, sure. And just immediately take that on. There's usually some exploration that goes on. So when you say I'm trans, they might ask you a question like, why do you think that? Then they're going to talk to you about your experiences and that sort of thing. Now there are, it's going to get a little bit more muddy, unfortunately, because
actually I got to talk to my wife for a second. But Sean, if you're still here, you can ask Zoe a question, or you guys can talk for a little bit.
Is that me?
What's up?
I just had one thing to kind of address. The main thing I'm trying to get the question in the comments was that the treatment is all for cosmetic reasons. Which is why we don't give it to children.
It's not just cosmetic reasons. You're changing like literally your hormones.
Right, for cosmetic reasons.
It's not just cosmetic reasons. Hormones impact like your emotions and other functions in your body.
Right, but the goal between HRT and stuff for minors is to change their cosmetic appearance, right? Their aesthetic appearance.
The goal is to help their body in line more with their identity, so that it reduces, if there is a discomfort, to reduce the discomfort between their identity and their external body.
Okay, but what discomfort? Is it a physical discomfort?
The discomfort would be like psychological distress. It would be dysphoria.
Right.
If they have dysphoria.
Aesthetic discomfort.
I'm back, by the way.
I don't like, nothing you're saying is even that's not even a critique. You're just saying that you have an opinion.
This is why we don't give Ozempic to children for weight loss. This is why we don't do a lot of cosmetic stuff for children, because it's you don't need to change the appearance of a child if there's no actual thing wrong with them. We only give cosmetic surgery for deformity or injury. We don't really give it for just because they want it.
That's not even all that accurate. One of the reasons why you can't really do cosmetic surgery on kids is also going to be like they're still growing. So like any cosmetic changes that you make might end up getting, I
agree, and it's the same. It's the same concept though. You have the same problem with trans stuff. That's why you don't do it for minors, because they're still growing.
Like, with all due respect, this is like one of the most awful takes I've heard so far. Like, you can't be serious that you think that this is a position that I hold. Yeah, you do think that I've advocated.
I'm trying to say this is why a lot of the stuff is being pushed back, because it's all for cosmetic reasons. And
that's not the case. Like, first of all, we don't do cosmetic surgery, like gender affirming stuff, like on young children.
Explain how all of the treatments, the medical treatment outside of just going to therapy, is not for an aesthetic purpose.
Because
to change your body,
yeah,
but every
because
single change
psychological distress isn't cosmetic.
Oh,
that's your answer.
Are you saying that people don't get surgeries or medical care for psychological distress?
Why would you ask a question to that when I answered what you asked? You said, am I saying that cosmetic, that there's other reasons, or that cosmetic the reason isn't purely cosmetic? Then I answer your question, and I'm telling you that psychological distress is not what we would label as cosmetic. Do you agree with that?
I'm sorry, you have to repeat.
Yeah, no, hang on, guys. I think, it's getting a little contentious in here. But on the topic of cosmetic stuff or surgeries, I think Zoe and I, point of agreement, you and I, based on the evidence we've seen, that minors should not get bottom surgery, correct?
Yeah, I've never heard I don't think I've ever heard a trans person ever advocate for minors getting bottom surgery.
Okay.
Because you would end up having a situation where the body's still growing and developing. So any alterations that people try to make there is just, you're going to risk complications, etc. Everything else. That's why would you
say the same thing for top surgery? The body's still growing and risking complications.
That's why they usually wait for puberty blockers, and then you start like microdosing a different hormonal change, and then when you get about 16, I think, is when you can start doing kind of like a cosmetic surgery.
Is your default?
And then
I got you. And you're consistent.
I just need to finish that last part. Typically, bottom surgery and stuff. The earliest that I've seen it is like 18. And I think Jazz Jennings, who everybody says, oh, well, she got it at 17. If you look, she was literally like 3 months from 18. So it's still about 18 years old.
Okay. So you're saying if the body stops growing, though, would you be for bottom surgery at 16?
I mean, the reason why they have that delineation is because the body is still growing. But I think you'd also want some time for them to be like on hormones to give them, a chance to like work everything out, like you said. We don't want to like rush the procedure or anything. And there is typically a process that people follow. I would be against just rushing people through things. Like, you want to give people time to explore their identity to make sure that it is stable and it's something that they desire before you do these things. And that also goes in conjunction with the actual body itself, the physicality of it that you've pointed to before.
Yeah, and so you and I agree there, time to explore their identity. And we just disagree whether that should be all the way to age 18 or not.
Well, it depends on, like, when should you start that, right? Because you would start that, like, pretty early on. And then you're, at least hopefully, if you give them, like, gender-affirming care early on, they could be, from, like, 8 years old or earlier, exploring that all the way up until they are, like,
to me,
17,
gender-affirming
18.
care as a minor should be just talking. Oh,
Why would it?
The social
why would it be
stuff.
just
I think you could do the social stuff too, like clothes or whatever, but not HRT.
Right. That's we're still in
blockers.
agreement.
Okay.
What's the medical
Well, hang on.
reason why it wouldn't?
We are in agreement there. No HRT or puberty blockers for minors.
When you're saying minor, if you mean 8 years old, then I would say no, unless they're going through precocious puberty. But if they are going into Tanner stage 2, that's where you would use puberty blockers.
Okay, is your default position that puberty blockers are safe until proven otherwise, or the other way around?
Well, considering that we've had data on them going back for at least 20 years, they are safe.
They are safe.
Mostly.
There's no negative
And
side
effects. I didn't say there's no negative side effects, just like there's not the case that there's no negative side effects of any procedure or medication.
What are the negative side
effects? So
effects?
there might be some negative. Right, you could look at a bone density or something. However, we also see that most people that come off of puberty blockers within 3 years, their bone density is about within cis ranges once again. And that's not necessarily the case for every single person. Every person's going to have a unique different experience with medication. This is true for all medication and all procedures.
Right. So this is why you list out the risks, and you are very hesitant to use medications if there can be other possible solutions. Like talking.
Are you aware that one of the side effects of Tylenol is that it can kill you? The first time you use it, there's the possibility that Tylenol can kill you. So if you've ever given your child Tylenol, then when you gave them that pill, there was the chance that it would kill them. Not just have a bad reaction, but they can die from it.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm aware that I have a pool outside and water can kill them too.
Right. Would you say that the risk that some people may have a very rare reaction to some medication that is that adverse, that would mean that we shouldn't just on average treat people with Tylenol?
Yeah, again, I'll give you the same pushback I gave you with the cancer thing. We're now comparing empirical problems with empirical solutions, but you're coming up with a metaphysics problem of identity and coming up with an empirical solution like drugs.
This is still empirical.
If you want to be consistent, you should have a
body.
metaphysical cure for a metaphysical problem. So maybe we should have prayer. Maybe prayer can fix trans people's problems of dysphoria.
No, by your standard, you were the one invoking puberty blockers, which is it's a physical thing. That's not a metaphysical problem.
Well, I'm saying you shouldn't do it because I don't think that it is. Well, you even admitted this, that there are negative side effects like bone density, like fertility, depending on how long you go. You're definitely going to affect the growth and height.
Could be.
Yes, could be. Just like with the COVID vaccine, you could die from taking it.
Right.
So this is
fine. With all due respect, buddy, I know you agree that there's a difference between something can happen and something will happen, right?
Right. So if you were a parent and you could have two solutions for your child, one includes taking medication with a low but possible risk or talking through counseling? What would you prefer?
Probably both, because you're going to end up
one or the
process,
other. Which would you
not,
choose?
That's not that's a that would be a false dilemma. You can do both.
Which would you prefer? In other words, which would you lean towards as the safer way to go?
I would go with what the standard model of care is for trans people, which includes
to me,
therapy
this is a cop-out
first.
answer.
Yeah, it's not. I just answered you. Therapy first, and then you move on to like puberty blockers and stuff later. I don't think that's directly in line with the healthcare guidelines for what they recommend for trans people.
Okay, yeah, and here we come to our main point of disagreement. Later to you means like maybe a year or two after the age of 14, whereas I say wait till they're adults. What's wrong with that?
Right, because now you're just...
Let's look at the downside. What's the downside of my idea?
The distress that it could cause these trans kids, like the psychological distress that
Okay,
could,
I'm okay with
lead
that.
Right, so at the end of the day, if you're like, I'm fine making them suffer, and if the goal to like giving them medical care is to reduce their suffering, then that would be why we have a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah, this is a fundamental disagreement where like some people just can't stand any suffering. I mean, any type of psychological suffering is a no-no. Whereas I come from a background where a little bit of psychological suffering is a good thing. It's what actually builds character.
We just have, we have different views on like ethics at that point, where I would say like in my ethical framework, it is better to have less suffering for somebody than more suffering. And within your ethical framework, having more suffering for some group of people that you think just ought to suffer more is acceptable.
All teenagers suffer.
No, you're specifically saying that this specific group, we're going to intentionally make them suffer through some process that they don't want to go through. That's easily halted with minimal risk, and they would be a lot happier. And if it is the case that they are trans, which as far as we can tell, when people assent to the proposition that they are trans, even when they are as young as 8 years old, when we've done studies on this and followed that up 4 years later, most of them, 99%, are still trans. So we know that there's a lot of accuracy with this, because this type of identity would be more of an impermeable identity as opposed to permeable identities, which I wanted to talk about earlier when you asked about that. But it got derailed with other people asking questions.
Yeah, I don't buy the... well, you said after 4 years, it's 99%?
Well, if you want to say the totality of what we would call trans people, it's going to be about 99%. It was like 95%.
I call BS on that. I call that BS with a capital B and a capital S. All
right. Just because like you have a bias, so you're going to say like if there is data that supports this, it just must be garbage?
No, because some of the data I've seen on this is that the people who have, let's say, detransitioned but don't report back, and they're kind of like lost in the weeds, they're not counted.
That would just be a missing... like, look, I agree that if we had more data, it would be better. But I'm not going to make the claim that just because like you lose track of somebody, that means you get to just make up whatever data you want.
Another problem is some of these studies, studies are based on data from the 70s and 80s and 90s, which are based on a different standard of care than the self-ID we have today. So in other words, if a person just says they're trans, it's affirming, okay, you're trans, versus back then there was a lot more hoops to go through. And so the rate of desistance, I say now, I don't think anybody knows the correct answer, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 60, 70%. So when someone says like a person like you says 1%, I say BS.
Yeah, no offense, but I don't want to just like make up numbers when it comes to empirics. If you're telling me that the number is 60 or 70%,
then don't say
that's
99.
The actual rate of detransitioners. I have data that suggests this. Now you can disagree
I'm saying your
with
data
it,
is flawed. Yeah,
and you can. Right, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I just want to point out, like, you would be doing the same thing that a lot of these religious people do, where they have a dogma against accepting certain claims about, like, biology or evolution. And you say, well, you have all this data from it. And then they're just going to say the methodology is flawed, or there's an institute funding
Okay,
it.
I
And
get
that
it, I
institute
get it.
is compromised.
I get
right,
it.
it's conspiracy.
So, but what would change your mind if it were true? If what I said was true, if 65-70% of people who say they're trans in their teens, by the time they're in their early 20s or late 20s, they say they're not. Would you change your mind on the issue of puberty blockers? Lean yes, lean no.
On puberty blockers, or would I just accept it
Puberty
as that
blockers.
it is the case that this is the case?
Listen
I would have to I'd have to look at the data. I'd want it like reflected. Like, are we talking about?
now you sound like that Christian you're just describing.
Did the Christians say they would like to see the data to understand
If
like
it
what
were
we're actually
true,
describing?
if it were true that 65-75%, something like that, a vast majority of kids who claim they're trans when they're young, that if we wait and say in their 20s or 30s that they say no, I'm not trans.
Yeah.
Would you be against HRT or puberty blockers for teenagers? Lean yes, lean no.
Yeah, in that possible world, I might lean that we should wait longer on it. But I'll ask you the exact same question. If it is the case that when teenagers identify as trans, they are very likely to remain identifying that way, upwards of 99%. Would you say that we should give children puberty blockers?
No, because I care about the 1% more than the mental
All right,
anguish
yeah.
of the 99.
That's
a fundamental disagreement.
And that's why. Yeah, that's why I said you have a dogmatic position, because you're saying you don't care what the data says. You would still deny it, or you'd still say no.
I'm saying I could recognize the data. I can enter the hypothetical with you and acknowledge it, and still say I care about the 1%. And the 1% severe medical problems that could happen to the 1% versus the 99%, which is just a little bit of I shouldn't phrase it that way, but mental anguish is not a huge deal for me compared to physical anguish.
Right, you're saying that you're just putting a value. I don't know why. It's so like
because people have different values.
The standard that the values that you're placing it makes it very clear that for some reason you value like cis experience way more than you do trans experience, and then you think that cis people suffering is like
what does that even
terrible
mean?
thing.
I value cis experience more than trans experience. If you're asking me, would I prefer my own children to be cis or trans? It's a no-brainer. I think most parents would say, we want our kids to be cis. If you're talking about, do we want dysphoria in our children or not? Of course we don't want dysphoria.
Right. So
do we want grandchildren? Of course we want grandchildren.
Right. You reduce dysphoria by allowing them to transition. So like the thing that you're saying that you don't want to do would help reduce the dysphoria that you don't want them to feel.
No, I'm saying it's okay to do it, but wait till they're adults. The only disagreement we have here is, and you yourself, I asked you the other day that would you be okay with someone getting HRT or puberty blockers 1 month after their first clinical visit, and you said no, something like 1 or 2 years. Is that right? Should wait 1 or 2 years.
I wouldn't say 1 month. I think the standard of care is about 1 year or so.
Yeah, 1 year or so.
Typically, but that would depend. Again, there might be exceptions based on Tanner stages, right?
Yeah.
And it would depend on the severity of the case, right? If we're talking about someone, like, it's so hard to come up with like examples of this because people are so unique. But it would be like if you had somebody who is like saying that they were just distressed because they felt like they had gender dysphoria. And they're going to their doctor, and the doctor refers them to a psychologist, and the psychologist talks to them, and they're just like they're distressed about this. It's worrying them. They can't explain these experiences and these strange feelings and stuff. Versus you have another kid who goes in there, and there's some suicide attempts in the background. Right, we're talking a very severe case, and this person is like telling the doctor that they are a woman, that they are, extremely distressed by what's going on with their body, and that if their body is going to develop through this puberty, they are going to harm themselves. I feel like the best course of action there would be to allow them to take puberty blockers, and then, as you said, engage in that therapy and counseling to find out what's going on with them. Because if they're saying that.
I think the best course, if someone is suicidal, I would say the better course of action is put them in a padded room and watch them and help them and talk with them.
So
if you can save lives by putting them in a padded room, wouldn't you do it?
I'm going to ask you the hypothetical. Okay. If it is the case that this person is going to kill themselves, if they are not able to get puberty blockers? Would you grant them puberty blockers so that you could then do therapy with them? Or would you just say that you would rather them kill themselves?
Well, of course I wouldn't want them to kill themselves. So if that's the hypothetical you're forcing me into, yeah, give them the puberty blockers. Now,
Okay.
Now, do we have data? How many trans people committed suicide last year in the United States? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head.
Well, that's because that number's not out there.
Oh, hold on. Give me 1 second. My wife is calling me.
Your wife? So you are heterosexual. Interesting. Oh, maybe wife means something else. When my wife called me, it was a woman.
What does this make his wife?
I don't know.
The plot thickens.
Yeah, I don't even know what wife means anymore. Wife could be a man. I don't know. Can it? Yeah, it can. So you still could be gay. And yeah, I was going to ask about more the political stuff. Like, we already talked about drugs. What else is there? Oh yeah, sports. That one's too easy though.
You know, Doug, I align with him or they more than probably you. However, the question that interests me and that always interests me is, because of the way my brain works, is why does gender get a special thing when we talk about being able to choose?
Why is gender special in that you can choose it?
Yeah. When you bring up, even though I disagree with a lot of the stuff that you bring up, right? Like, can I choose to be a tree? Can I choose to be this? Can I choose to be a different race? Why does gender get that special?
Oh yeah.
Because they were saying, right, like, obviously this is whatever to you. I don't want to talk about this. But my question is, why does gender get that play? And that's just, even as an advocate and, a person that's empathetic to the trans community,
I think
that's always been interesting to me.
I think the answer would be, because it's just more intuitive. It seems like it makes more sense that people could identify as a man or a woman versus a tree, because it's, well, Zoe said it, because it's a category error. It's like something so different. So when it becomes so different, then you can't use that analogy. But
right,
race is not that
like
different.
Race, or you talk about,
yeah, race is not that different.
Well, it's not. But then the other thing that I do think, and again, it comes from, I think, a good place and just being inquisitive, is when someone says they, to me, do they consider themselves two genders? Because to me, they implies more than one person. So when they think of themselves, do they think of, I'm this one, I'm two people? Because to me, they implies that. So when choosing the pronoun, if I'm right in that, when they chose the pronoun they, was it because they're the two-spirited? When they said they weren't two-spirited, that surprised me, because I thought that's where I wonder where the they comes from.
Yeah, I agree.
We are back, by the way.
Yeah, Sean had a good question. What do you mean? What do you mean? Why did you choose the pronoun they?
All right. We told you before in a prior chat that we are a DID system, but we don't want to discuss that.
You're a deity system?
DID, dissociative system.
Okay, meaning that there's two parts of, you're a substance dualist or something like that?
No, DID is a mental health condition. It used to be called multiple personality. It's a dissociative identity disorder.
Okay. So do you, because I know some trans people get some trans activists get very upset with me if I mention mental illness. Do you admit you have a mental illness?
I want to answer some of the questions that were asked beforehand, though, because I did hear the questions and you'd already nailed the category error thing. Because there's a difference between people having gendered experiences versus someone who's saying something like they aren't human, because they are trying to argue that the when we're talking about like the state of affairs that causes someone to like obtain humanity is one thing, and the state of affairs that would have a tree obtain it, you know, being a tree, those are completely different things.
But not race.
Humans have identities, right? And well, the race thing is something different, because you end up, like, when we're talking about race, we're trying to describe ethnic groups that have a lineage, and you'd be doing the same thing and basically saying, I wasn't actually born from like this woman, or, you know, these people. And it ends up becoming a weird thing where you're trying to argue that reality itself is different than what it is. That's not what gender is. Gender is an internal model of self.
But that's a matter of definitions. Like if I define gender, let's say I can define it at least in two ways. One based as a synonym for male or female. Another is the degree of manliness or femininity.
Right.
So, yeah. But anyhow,
this is just language games at this point. This is what Wittgenstein was talking about when he was talking about people that play language games would be doing things like that.
I want to keep it off you, but I just want to talk about mental illness in general. Would you say that trans people in general have mental illness?
I think that humanity in general has mental illness.
Would you say that trans people in general have more mental illness than other people?
It would depend on what you're defining as mental illness.
Something that a doctor would have to fix.
I'm saying it depends on what you would define, right? So if I'll just ask you the question, right? If I say, are depressed people mentally ill?
Yeah, it depends on the degree.
Right, it depends on the degree. So the same thing goes for trans people. It depends on what you mean. If you mean that are trans people mentally ill by default because they have gender dysphoria, then no, because gender dysphoria is not a requirement to be trans. Now, a lot of trans people experience gender dysphoria, and then we'll go on to take HRT or something. This is going to be an entire like can of worms about this, but essentially, you could then say that you're going to have two groups of people there, right? You would have trans people that don't have gender dysphoria, and then trans people that do have gender dysphoria, and the people that have gender dysphoria tend to pursue things like HRT surgeries and that type of thing.
Okay, someone with gender dysphoria, are they mentally ill, in your opinion?
I don't think so. I don't think gender dysphoria ought to be categorized as a mental illness, but somebody had mentioned before the way that our system categorizes things for the purpose of insurance and that sort of stuff.
Right. That was my next question. So if someone is not mentally or doesn't have a mental illness, is not ill, why do they need to see a doctor?
Because it's a medical condition, not a mental illness.
Okay, it's a condition.
In the same way that being autistic is is classified as a condition, like a neurodivergence condition. So
someone with gender dysphoria has a mental condition.
Right. That's how we would classify it for the purposes of insurance, but it might not be something that we necessarily want to qualify as mental illness. Now, I know in the updated version, I think in the ICD-11, this is what they're talking about already doing. Like this is already being drawn up, of categorizing some things as conditions and some things as illness. But even then, the way that they talk about mental illness is starting to be restructured, because it turns out it might not help to imply that people that have mental health conditions necessarily have some type of like disease, which is implied with illness.
See, but this gets to just the labeling of it, how you label it, whether illness or condition causes mental anguish in the patient. Is that what we're talking about?
No, we're talking due to societal perceptions, and this includes like even doctors' biases against certain kinds of patients. So like there may be at one point in time, if you said that somebody was homosexual or whatever, they would say, oh my gosh, this person is mentally ill. And upon further investigation, more evidence, we realized that not only was that very incorrect, but this is actually a normal expression of human sexuality, and it was removed entirely. That may be the case what happens with gender dysphoria in the future. It just may be the case that trans expression is just another expression of human gender. And the issue is if we look historically at what you asked earlier, we do find in historical cultures that there would be people that you would probably call trans, going all the way back to the earliest records that we have. The difference is that the word trans didn't exist back then, and they may have viewed it differently through their culture at the time, like especially through a religious lens.
Yeah, like even in Thailand today, ladyboys, they don't call themselves women. They call themselves ladyboys. They wouldn't say they're women.
That's not true. Ladyboys is a misnomer that
That's what they call
Western
themselves,
people have.
right?
Hold on.
On their
That's what Western people have used a lot. And because enough people are calling you that, some of them have taken on that label. However, if you look at that community specifically, more and more of that community do identify as trans. And then there are other words as well. The ladyboy is a slang that Western people call them. That's not actually what their identifier is.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Just like you have hydras in the Middle East. And the thing is that you can look at like hydras, and then there are some people that say, well, they're not trans, or not all of them identify as trans, but a lot of them do. And we can just run that back if you want to talk about like Two-Spirit or any of these other identities that have existed in these other cultures where there are other variant gender expressions. So then we get to our modern sense in the West, and all of a sudden it's controversial to say that there are any more gender expressions than man or woman, which ends up being perplexing because we know that other cultures have allowed for these expressions because people are capable of expressing themselves in more ways than just man and woman. And it's, like non-binary people, for instance.
Let's quickly run through the other political stuff. Males in women's sports, lean yes, lean no?
I would lean yes on that one.
Okay. Males in women's change rooms, lean yes, lean no? Who identifies trans?
I guess I'm going to add a little nuance to this. And I would say that, like, if we're talking, it depends on how you're defining all of this stuff, right? And are we talking somebody who's, like, following an HRT regimen and all that sort of thing? If you, because I was trying to grant your position, and I made an assumption there, maybe I shouldn't have. But if you're just saying that it would help out just for the sake of, like, what you're actually asking, when you say males, are you meaning trans women or like trans non-binary people in this situation that are taking HRT?
I mean, someone who identifies as trans, whether it's HRT, whether they're taking it or not. Yeah, I didn't specify. So it could be both,
right.
Either.
I would put stipulations on a lot of these questions. All the questions about sports and competing in there and stuff like that, I would say that it's going to depend on metrics like, are they taking HRT, the length of time they've been on HRT, because like the primary thing.
Let's say they have been taking HRT, but they still look like a man, and they make the majority of women uncomfortable. Do you care about the mental anxiety or anguish in the cis women, or no?
I don't understand what you mean by makes them uncomfortable. Like,
so
they don't like that they have broad shoulders or something.
Yeah, well, let's say the majority of the women view this one particular trans woman as male. Like, they can tell that, this person's trans, but they can tell that, this is a male, has a penis. And I don't want a penis in my change room. And they feel uncomfortable and they have mental anguish about that. Do you care about the cis women?
First of all, there should be like private areas in all of these like changing rooms or whatever. Like, no one should have to see anyone else's genitalia first and foremost. So like having a penis isn't relevant. And like, if I were in my ideal world, simply because like there should be changing rooms and stuff. I did play sports when I was a teenager, and I was in a lot of locker rooms. And there were showers and stuff in there. And, unfortunately, there are people, most of these people, all cis, by the way, that decide to walk around naked. And I didn't want to see that. And I don't think anyone should have to see the genitalia of anyone that they don't want to see the genitalia of.
Let's say no genitalia is shown. It's just the women see this, what they think is a male, which let's say in this case is a male, walks in. Do you care that they're uncomfortable?
I mean, when you say this person looks like a male, like I'm not sure like what you're. So if you're talking
that
like
their transition
someone
isn't
like
complete, that they, or it's a bad transition, that they present themselves from our mammalian pattern-seeking brain that no, this is a male, and it makes them uncomfortable. But they're trans. Do you take into consideration the mental anguish of the cis women?
right, because you said we're not taking genitalia, so I don't know how they would be impacted otherwise. Like
They have
if it's
mental
like,
anguish.
Oh no, right? If they say, "Oh, you just have XY chromosomes," then I would probably just say the same thing you did earlier. That I'm fine with some mental anguish.
There you go.
Right?
Okay, so now if we're going with the concept of do no harm or do as little harm as possible, then since there's way more cis women than trans women, should we not err on the side of the cis women because we can decrease more harm?
No, because not all cis women have an issue with trans women. Only
I didn't say that.
Small percentage. You're implying that cis women are the majority, and you're implying that the majority of cis women have an issue with trans women, when in fact
in the changing
I could
room,
just reverse. Yeah, I could reverse this.
You got polling data on that?
Majority, if the majority of cis women, like on a sports team, are comfortable with trans athletes, but they have psychological distress of the idea of having a turf among them, should they be able to say that non-trans supporting cis women are not allowed to be in that space because it makes them uncomfortable, cause them distress?
Hang on, a turf, you said?
Yeah. If there's a cis woman who does not support trans people and her teammates are made uncomfortable by her bigotry, and they say, I don't want bigots in my changing room because it makes me uncomfortable, and we're talking like 1 or 2 turfs on a team versus the majority of these other women, would you say that those other cis women ought not be allowed in there?
Yeah.
Simply because people find discomfort?
If the criteria is mental anguish, then yes. To be consistent, yeah. Then the turf should be turfed.
You would say that they shouldn't be allowed to be in there?
Right.
What if it, hold on. All right, let's get really spicy.
Because right now the factor that we're looking at is mental anguish.
No, hold on. What if it's a black person? Should they say that we just don't allow black people in here, like because it makes white people
based on this
uncomfortable?
one thing? Yes. Then the black person's turfed. I mean,
that's just wild. I don't take the standard of saying like we have to have an absolute reduction of anguish as much as possible, because there could always be. Because there could always be a problem where you say like. So
you're saying a little bit of mental anguish is okay?
Of course it is.
Thank you. I like that.
Yeah, because you're talking, when you say a little bit, right now you're trying to.
So
quantify
if we make a
things.
trans person wait for their HRT, a year extra, and it causes them a little bit of mental anguish, not a whole lot, but a little bit, you're okay with that?
It's not a little bit. We would say that
I'm saying
according to the data,
it is a little bit, that they're not that bad in dysphoria.
It's not.
Hang on, you got to be consistent now.
It's not a little bit of anguish, and
I'm saying it is. In this hypothetical, it's a little bit of anguish for them to wait one more year for their HRT. You'd be okay with that. It's just a little more anguish.
You're trying to assert,
and they have more time to develop and explore their identity.
No, you're talking about doing harm now, as opposed to unavoidable anguish.
What harm besides mental anguish?
Literally cause them psychological harm by saying
but it's a little bit.
You're not going to follow the best medical procedures given for them at the time.
You're being inconsistent, because with the cis women, you said a little bit of mental anguish is okay.
Because these are different things. You're talking someone being allowed in a space as a difference between giving someone health care.
Health care? We are giving them health care through counseling during that.
Would you assent to that? Do you agree that somebody being allowed to be around you, like if you say like Zoe is such a jerk, right, and you just don't like me, and my presence just makes you uncomfortable because you think I'm such a terrible person, right? Are you going to say that me just being allowed to like be in a gas station standing near you or something to buy like a Pepsi, that we're talking about change rooms. That you follow would be the same type of anguish that you would feel if you were denied medical care?
If it's the same degree of mental anguish, then yeah, it's the same. But you're saying it's not the same degree of mental anguish. But in this hypothetical I gave you, let's say the amount of discomfort of being around a trans person is, let's say, 2 units of mental anguish, and making a trans person wait 1 extra year for getting HRT increases the mental anguish 2 units, then they're equal, right?
All you're saying is, you're just saying, in a hypothetical world, if I can just say that trans people don't suffer that much mental anguish, then would you say that in that given scenario, they don't suffer mental anguish?
No, they
Right.
do, but just a little bit.
Right. So if we say like, we could just extrapolate that to anything else and say like, well, if we just say like, cancer patients, they don't really suffer a lot of anguish, right? In a hypothetical world, if they weren't really suffering and it was only a little bit of anguish, should we treat them? Should that be okay to just ignore the cancer?
Let's move on. If there was an empirical test to know with, let's say, 99% confidence that someone is trans or not, this question might not even make sense to you, but let's say there was a test. Would you take that test?
I don't see how it's relevant to anything. I don't need a empirical. I don't need someone else to tell me what my identity is, right? Because my identity is formed internally.
Now, okay, do you think transness is caused by biological at all?
Okay, so this is going to be fun, right? We would say that when it comes to biological processes, your brain itself is biological, right?
Do you think that biological development, like in the fetus, or even early years, do you think that has any impact on whether someone's trans?
I'd have to answer, I don't know. We could say that there seems to be some evidence that indicates like hormone washing or something could be related to this, but we don't know. Just like if you say, do I think there's like a gay gene or something? I don't know if there's a gay gene or not.
Okay, so your answer is I don't know. Let's now go into a hypothetical world where we do know, and let's say it is biologically driven. Let's say we can scientifically show that with either a certain gene or a certain development pathway, we can predict 99% of the time that someone's going to be trans. Let's say that's the world we live in. Would you support that someone would have to go through that test and get their trans badge in order to go into a woman's locker room?
No, I'm not a trans medicalist.
Why wouldn't you support that? Because that way we can get rid of all the liars and fakers who just want to, get a quick glimpse of a woman naked or something. We can get rid of all those people. We say, no, this is trans certified. Why wouldn't you support that?
Here we go. I had to turn my mic back on. I'm saying that that's not the thing that we're concerned about necessarily, right? Like when you're talking about going into like a locker room, as long as the person meets specific conditions.
The conditions here is passing the trans test.
Why? I'm saying like I don't understand like even what you're describing here. It seems like an absurd hypothetical because to me the sufficient thing would to say, do they identify as a woman or are they taking some type of like hormone regimen?
No.
Etc.
Zoe, the hypothetical I'm constructing here is that science has made a major breakthrough. It's announced tomorrow on CNN that we actually found a trans gene. We found a development pathway that we can now know, we can predict with 99% confidence and certainty of that this person is trans. It has a biological basis for it. Okay, so now now we have, let's say, 1 million people in the world who say they're trans. They can take a blood test or a MRI, whatever, some type of empirical test that says you are trans or no, you just think you are and you're not. Would you support the use of that machine?
So to fully understand your hypothetical, just to clarify, are you saying that you could have some type of special identity detector that could detect whether people actually have commitments to their identities before they walk into an area?
What I'm saying is this identity has a biological basis that we have now found, and everything that you thought about identity is now turned from, I don't know, some metaphysical thing to a physical thing, empirical. So we can put trans in a test tube, in other words, in this hypothetical. Would you support a trans test? So we can actually say, oh, okay, you're a male, but you want to run with the females at the Olympics. In order to do that, you have to pass the trans test. because we want women to compete against women, and so would you support that?
I would have to say I don't know. I'd have to see like what all that entails, because like non-binary people can compete as well, right? And then people that have other identities would be able to compete as well. So I don't even know what the like. You're saying, oh, there's a biological basis for identity, but the identity isn't the thing that you're trying to restrict.
See, my question gets to your bias, and your bias is so pro-trans that you're not even willing to risk that someone who says they're trans may be not.
Okay. I'm
But
glad
you
phrased it that way.
by you answering, I don't know. You're admitting
I'm glad
this.
you said this. I'm glad that you said this. Okay. Because that revealed like the heart of what you were actually getting at. Are there people that could malinger? Sure, people can malinger about anything, right? People malinger about being depressed. People malinger about being a Christian. People malinger about being an atheist. Because it turns out that people can lie. And you can have people that are pathological liars that just can't help themselves but try and deceive people. That's why I had mentioned from the very beginning specific types of commitments, right? Commitments to an identity.
So if you
and
admit people can
if
lie,
you have this commitment, and
then,
hold on,
then why wouldn't you want the test?
You keep also saying that my understanding of gender is somehow some weird, vague, metaphysical thing. Where like I stated at the very beginning that I was an existentialist. So like that should have told you what my views were on like identity and where it comes from, and that's not necessarily I'm not appealing to some vague metaphysical property. I'm saying that I think that your actual existence comes first, and then your identity comes later, and that's made up from phenomenological experiences that you have, right? And you could say like, well, those phenomenological experiences are based on your observations and that sort of stuff.
All this can be summarized as self-ID.
No, that's based on, the external world around you would be those empirics. You can take an internalist sense and evaluate your own identity. And when other people say identity, what do they mean? And you can gather data and information through observation about these social archetypes and that type of stuff. Then recognize like where you do and don't fit in. Then if you say, well, what makes up, gender at the core of it, then you can say, well, it's something that can be correlated to sex. And there might be some properties that it has, which you try to list properties at the very beginning. Then I could just ask you, where do those properties come from? Like, what makes up those properties? Why do you perceive those properties? And then we could say, okay, well, there's facts about them. And then we are extrapolating properties from these facts. And you say, well, what makes up the facts? And then you can say, okay, well, there must be atomic facts about these facts that back this up. And then I could just say, okay, where do those atomic facts come from? And at the end of the day, if we drill down, no matter what your view is, no matter what your framework is, you're at some point going to run it into something like a Grippish trilemma when you're trying to establish like at the very core.
How many credit hours of philosophy do you have?
What's that?
How many credit hours of philosophy do you have?
How many accredited hours of philosophy do I have?
Credit hours, yeah, in undergraduate.
None. I'm just autistic, and it's a special interest of mine.
Okay. Good. To clarify all this, I think make this very simple. If someone goes into a clinic and says, I would like to be seen for gender dysphoria or gender, I'm trans, okay? They're not lying. Can they be still wrong, in your opinion?
If they're not lying, are we granting, like, would you grant me the, like, basic laws of logic?
Yeah.
Okay. So if they're not lying, then we could say that they could be mistaken.
Right. Can a trans person be mistaken about being trans, in your view?
I think anyone that has any identity could be mistaken about that identity given, like, sufficient conditions.
Okay, because it's their identity, right? So if they are self-reporting what their identity is, I'm confused. How can they be wrong about it or mistaken?
Yeah, because I'm an existentialist. You should already know this.
Right, but how can they be mistaken if it's their identity?
Right, I'll say it again. So what that entails then is because I'm an existentialist, I believe, or I won't say believe, I'll say like as far as I can tell, because I do remain skeptical about like just everything, but as far as this goes, your identity is going to be made up of your experiences And because you're constantly having new experiences and you're crossing through, as far as we can tell, time. So you're having different thoughts. You might be doing introspection. You might be doing metacognition.
How can they be
you
wrong
might be
about
engaging
that?
with metaethics. Now, hold on for a second. You do change over time, and different parts of your identity could change depending on certain experiences. And the reason we know that people can be wrong about this stuff is because at one point in time they might identify as cis, and then they identify as trans. So we know that this can change.
But at
Just like
that
people
moment, can they be wrong?
I already granted that people could be wrong, right? That it could be the case that they're telling the truth, that they're giving you accurate information.
Okay, so someone can
that
say
they
they're
have
trans and be
commitments.
wrong.
Just like anyone could say anything and be wrong, right?
Okay, so why would you say I don't know to the trans test? In that
Because
hypothetical?
they're affirming to some proposition, they have commitments to it. They've expressed like commitments to this, and it is something that seems to be
commitments to being
impermanent
wrong?
or durable over time.
Over time. Yes. Now we're converging into the same wavelength. This is why I say that trans people should wait before they make any major decisions that could dramatically change their life.
You know, it's strange that we've agreed on this since the very beginning, and it's been so difficult to get here, right? So, like, would you agree
Which
that
to me
people can
means
be-
no puberty blockers, no surgeries before the age of 18, and in my opinion, should be like in their 20s. I think you
Right,
did
now
it the
you're just
right way
drawing-
because you're in the 30s.
You're just drawing like arbitrary delineations now. I say that there should be some time, and you're like, well, yeah, that
That's
must
arbitrary.
mean-
Sometime you're doing
Right.
the same thing.
I've already told you the time that I would say that I think that would count as to give you at least enough
You
time
said
to
1
explore
year.
through therapy. About a year, that you could test the durability of your construct and your commitments to this by starting to socially transition.
You think you can learn so much and be so confident about major life decisions from going from a 14-year-old to a 15-year-old?
No, it's via your experiences, your internal model of self, okay, your metacognition. These are the things that I'm pointing to. I'm not just saying you go from 14 to 15, right? There are other factors besides time.
Okay.
I don't know why you would boil it down to saying like, well, you're just implying 14 to 15. That's not, like, no offense. I'm trying to be as charitable as possible, and I've tried to answer everything as honestly as I could. But when we're talking about identity, you would agree that some people are straight and then they end up coming out as gay. That happens, right?
Yes.
Okay, do you think it's possible? And when I say possible, I'm talking about philosophical possibility, not like however other way you might interpret that. Do you think it's possible that that gay person could then turn around later on after they've had gay sex and other things? Is it possible for them to say, you know what? Actually, I was mistaken about that. I'm bisexual.
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that sexuality is an identity that we have? It's based on some aspect of physicality, right? There's some type of orientation that we're pointing to.
I think it has a huge biological component that the trans thing doesn't.
No. It's rooted in desire. Okay, you have a desire to experience certain sexual expressions, right?
Right.
All right. That desire is rooted in biology only in the sense that's being produced by your brain, right?
Right, which is biological, right?
Right, that's biological. That's why when people ask me, like, do I think that identity is based in biology? I find that a ridiculous question.
A third-party person can actually run experiments and tests and demonstrate that someone's, let's say, more gay than not. Let's just, instead of a binary switch of gayness and straightness. But you can't do that with trans.
How can you demonstrate with tests that somebody is gay or straight?
You can hook up MRIs and then put certain, let's say, pictures in front of them to see if they get sexually aroused. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's not reliable. Okay, so there are.
It's way more
just like
reliable
you said,
than diagnosing trans.
Hold on a second. Just like you said, there are people that could lie or be mistaken, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Are there people that could? Because we know
lie
that.
about your thingy going up.
Right, but there are other physiological responses like stress that could cause that, right?
Sure, you got to do it many times. You got to control for certain environments and so
you
forth.
have to, right.
Make sure they eat
Now,
the same foods.
Right, because now you're having to add all these other variables into it. So there's a lot of different reasons that might impact.
Do you deny
like, what if
that
they took a Viagra?
that it's more objective, that the gayness is more objective than transness? Do you deny that?
I would say that it's no more objective. They are not directly analogous, but they are very analogous, because transness, that identity, is going to be rooted in biology, your brain, once again. The expression to that, just like someone says, I'm gay, they're assenting to the proposition that I am gay. When they say, I am trans, they're assenting to the proposition, I am trans. And then we say, okay, if they have the commitment of being gay, what ought we expect from them? Well, typically they might express themselves in certain ways, because that's how homosexual people tend to express
you said they're
themselves.
comparable.
I'm drawing the analogy for you. I'm just making it.
But you don't think it's reliable to detect, like, if a third party, if someone was to pay me $1 million, okay, your job is to determine if that person's gay or straight, and you can only use science to do it. You can't use the social stuff, like go out and watch them, have sex or whatever. You think that I could at least get close? Do you think it's possible that I could, like, if I don't know about most men, but if you put a picture of a naked man in front of me, never in my life. Maybe
I thought you said we couldn't look at like them having sex or whatever. So that would include like can't look at
them individually doing it. So they're acting, but I'm saying that you could present pictures in front of them, and you could present a picture in front of a man and they get aroused. That's more objective than sitting down.
Right, so if I put a picture of a trans body in front of you, and it's a person that has like large breasts and a penis.
Hang on,
you don't think you can tell me if you predict that person is not typically what you would describe as being male or female?
Sorry, there's a big storm going on. I just had an emergency in it. I think I heard what you said though. I would say if you're basically saying, if you're fooling me, that it looks like a woman, it's really a man.
Come on, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm not saying.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm saying that if because you said I could look at a naked body and make certain assessments based on like a measurement of their arousal or something. Then I said, okay, well, if we took a trans person and we took a trans body, so this person might have stereotypically like large breasts that you would associate with females, but might have like a penis as well,
like a ladyboy.
I don't know why you have to like.
Are you offended by that?
There. No, I just
okay. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it as an offense. I'm just saying you're describing. Okay, never mind. It doesn't.
Right. What if you were giving your example with a gay guy, and I said, "Oh, so you mean like an F slur?" And I just like threw that in there. You'd be like, "Why did you
view ladyboy as like an F slur?"
No, I'm saying that is a label that was put on a community that they didn't choose themselves. There's usually a negative connotation to that.
There is?
Those people themselves, yes, and those people
themselves news to me.
They don't necessarily identify.
I apologize to all the ladyboys who might be listening. I mean, all the people that might be listening who don't like that label. My apologies.
Right. And to be honest with you, the frustration I have isn't necessarily like, oh no, you said something offensive. It's I feel like you're derailing the conversation by invoking.
No, I was literally just
trying
to. I was explain. Never mind. I think we're done. But there's, I mean, between you and me. But if you want to take questions from other people who've been waiting patiently in here, that's up to you.
Right. So do you feel I answer your questions like sufficiently? Like I directly address them?
Yeah, I think do you want me to summarize your beliefs? Or
I mean, if you think you can, I wouldn't expect you to summarize my beliefs. I have some pretty I'll say I have a belief system that a lot of people don't. And I'm saying belief system like very roughly there, right?
Yeah. On this one issue, like you're basically okay with having HRT and puberty blockers for teenagers after intense therapy and at least a year of therapy. When it comes to sports, you're okay with trans women being in women's sports. Same thing with women's spaces. You view transness as an identity. That has that can evolve in a way through just your existence and your phenomenological experiences. What else? What else did we talk about? Oh, you're against Trump and Project 2025 because I'm not sure about Project 2025. He even says this, but you're for at any age, and Trump said no, it can't be for any age, and you're against that. And there, I agree with you. By the way, what else did we talk about? You said I don't know about the trans test. You don't know about whether that it has a biological component or it's caused by biology. What else? How am I doing so far? I'm not misrepresenting you, right?
It's just a general summary of the conversation, sure.
Yeah. So I'm just demonstrating I've been listening.
Right, and I do want to point out that whenever you're talking about PU blockers and that sort of thing, I've said several times that I would recommend following these standard guidelines, right? And those include therapy, social transition, and then that is going to go into PU blockers at Tanner stage 2. That's the time. So like if the person is going into that earlier or later, that's the time that you would do something like that. Then you would microdose hormones up until they're old enough to transition with their peers, which is usually about I think 16 or something like that. Then you switch over to a normal hormone regimen, and then we wouldn't be looking at surgeries or anything probably until about 18. I find that to be reasonable. I find that to be a long period of time from the time that they're 8 or 9 all the way up until a late teen. So just to clarify the language there, because a lot of people will say child when they mean like a 17-year-old. And they're just trying to conflate a 17-year-old at the same as you would call a child as like a 9-year-old, and it just ends up sounding more hyperbolic.
What if
and I don't want to engage in hyperbole.
Like I said that I'm okay with trans people taking drugs and surgeries after the age 18, but I would admit I even have exceptions there. Like, tell me if you agree with this. Like, if the trans person is highly schizophrenic or very, very autistic, and basically their judgment-making capacity for such decisions have been greatly impaired, I would say that society has an obligation to think twice at least and maybe not do it. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, that's part of the standard protocols. If you have some type of delusional disorder, or you end up having some type of psychotic disorder, it definitely impacts you. And being able to get access transition care, and I would say in general, we already take precautions against stuff like that. That's already accounted for. We would recognize that if somebody has a delusional or psychotic disorder, we would exercise caution there and make sure that the person can consent in a stable frame of mind.
Well, here's my last trap question. You ready? I admit it's a trap question, but it's kind of funny. I heard it the other day. If a woman identifies as a male, is she a man?
No.
No.
Because you're saying male. What do you mean identifies as a male?
Can someone identify as a male? Is that
theoretically, even possible? Yeah, it could be possible, right? And we didn't even get to this. I thought we were going to spend most of our time in biology, and instead it ended up being philosophy, but it is a special interest of mine, so that might have been my fault. But when we're talking about biology, right, the categories of male and female are also just artificial delineations. Those are as much socially constructed as gender is. And depending on how much critical theory that you might accept, sex and gender might be very closely correlated or entwined. It may not be possible to fully express thoughts about one without also to comment about another one. And that any line that people want to make about this group of people is strictly male and people at this cluster of traits is strictly female is just not the case. Intersex people do exist. And depending on if you're taking HRT or not, you could make the argument that because properties of your body empirically have altered and you physically have properties of what somebody else might call a different sex. And you could either, I would say identify as an intersex female, or intersex male by inducing those intersex conditions within yourself, if you want to ask about something like that. So that's how that could happen, in my opinion. And as far as like, could you identify, say like, well, yeah, I'm an intersex male and I'm, non-binary. That's because your gender identity isn't necessarily tied to your biology. Like one does not have to be informed by the other. And gender expression, by the way, is different than gender identity or sex. And people conflate this all the time. We're like, what about a tomboy, or what about a gay man that's effeminate? Yeah, you're talking about gender expression. You're not talking about gender identity, which is the identity portion of that. You're talking about the expression. And you're not talking about the sex part of it, where you're just listing physical properties of someone's reproductive system.
So in your opinion, can someone identify as a male? Or are they just a male?
They would identify as an intersex male. If they said that they identified as a male and they weren't going to...
Let's say they're not intersex. They're not intersex. If someone is it possible even, does the question even make sense to ask or to say that someone identifies as a male?
I would be confused if they are claiming that they have properties that they don't have, but it might be consistent and it could make sense if they were like an anti-realist about sex at all. Like they just think that categories of sex are just nonsensical and that we're all human beings and we all just have properties. And they're just using the label because they find it useful or something. Someone could have a view to take that view and be coherently consistent. I wouldn't have a problem with that person doing it. The only issue that I would take is that obviously it's going to cause problems with communication if they are using very idiosyncratic terms. And it might create,
so male is attached to
socially.
something. So male is attached to something empirical, and so it really, what I'm hearing you say in a non-intersex situation, it really doesn't make sense to say you identify as a male. You are a male.
It depends. No, it's contingent upon your view, right?
No, I'm talking societal view.
Now we're extrapolating just from someone's identity and.
Yeah, it'll just confuse things. Do you identify or do you say you're a male?
No, I would identify as an intersex female because my body has the properties that people culturally associate with females and with males.
Okay, you said that earlier, but do you think that identity could be wrong? Like, could we test that you're an intersex?
Yeah, you could test that.
Okay. So when you say you identify as an intersex female, you said?
Yeah. That if you were trying to accurately describe us, I think that the most accurate assessment of the facts are that we would be an intersex
I always
female.
think of the Trinity when you say us.
Well, there's definitely more than three of us. But,
so you could be wrong. You could be wrong about being intersex if once you get tested, you'd say, I thought I was intersex female, but I'm not. That could happen.
I'm saying if you're solely basing that on karyotype, then we can't know that. But if you're asking, would other people that didn't know me, didn't know my identity, and they were only looking at facts about my body, what would
that's what intersex means, right? It's a very biological term.
What does it? Are you talking about? Does it mean the properties that your body has, or does it mean like it's excluded down to karyotype?
Well, whatever scientists say is intersex. That's what intersex is, right? It's like there's many different.
Oh yeah, but you don't accept what scientists say about intersex people. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the contention with it. Yeah, intersex scientists say they state my position on what intersex is.
Have you even heard me talk about intersex before?
Okay, so. Would you say that there probably are people, like if you're on HRT, that they would have induced an intersex condition?
That they would have induced an intersex condition?
Yeah, their body over time changes some properties and gains properties that you would have associated with
I see
one
what you're
sex
getting
over
at.
the other.
No, I would not say that.
Okay, so you disagree with the science? Absolutely.
Yes, I'll say that, but I don't think the science says that.
It does. So here's the problem.
Well, I'm sure there's some people who say that.
It's the majority. Like you're literally saying that you just throw away the science if it disagrees
Well,
with you.
now
on
we're
this
back to
position.
definitions. Like if intersex means that you put breasts on a man, now you're intersex. Is that what you're saying?
No. So what I was trying to explain was that generally speaking, we can look at like either 5 to 10 like properties that someone would have, and that when you look at someone who is male or female, we're generally talking about like somewhere in like 7 or 8 out of 10. Generally speaking, is enough to push people to say, I think that's a male.
People
or
are
I think
scientists.
That's a female.
People are scientists. Yeah. So if I do make 5 bodily changes on a person, a scientist would say
it would depend.
They're now intersex.
When we're talking about science, we're talking like a methodology, right?
Okay. Sorry, Zoe. When I ask a question like that and you say, when we talk about science, we talk about methodology. I mean, just to answer the question, if we take off the breast, we take off the penis, we get long hair, are you saying now a scientist say, oh, now they're intersex?
No, you're literally saying, like, well, scientists are people, and if some people say this, and I'm saying, like, when we're talking scientists, we're talking people that are using...
Would it be the consensus of science that they're now intersex if you take off their penis and add breasts and put long hair on and lipstick?
If we're going by methodological naturalism, that process, which is what we would define as science, then yes, most of the people that look at that person are going to say that is an intersex person.
Okay.
If I go to the doctor, and I get any work done whatsoever, I have to let them know that I'm trans because I have these intersex conditions. So they have special.
You don't know you're intersex. You haven't been tested. You're assuming.
I don't know why you're not tracking this. I said earlier, if you define intersex as only being karyotype, then I don't know because I've never had a karyotype test done. But if you ask me, am I intersex? I would say, yes, if you mean, do I have intersex properties? Of course I do. And it has to be taken into consideration with medicine and everything else I do. If I go and get any kind of like internal work done, they would have to take that into consideration. And I think doctors would qualify as like, at least some scientists of medicine, biology.
Okay.
Because parts of your biology change through taking a hormone regimen.
Okay, well, we've been going for like, how long have we been talking? 3 hours? No way. Has it been 3 hours?
It's been 3 hours, yeah.
I think we should leave it there. I do appreciate you, Zoe, coming on and talking with me. It was much better than, the other place.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Can I just ask for the record? You were recording this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, my computer crashed like halfway through. Could you send me the complete VOD?
The complete VOD is on my YouTube channel right now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you want to say or add before we close this out?
No, my son has either just got home or so I actually got to take off right away. But yeah, thanks for coming on. And sorry, I'm going to just end the live stream right here. And you guys can discuss in the comments if you want. And I'm sure we'll talk again, Zoe.
Yeah, I hope that, maybe I've given you some food for thought, and hopefully, I've been able to offer at least some positions.
Well, I'll be very honest with you.
Trans.
I think most of your views are absolutely crazy, especially the last part we just talked about. That just really got me. But I don't want to rehash it. I don't want to rehash it. But
yeah.
I'm just letting you know my internal phenomenological experience of craziness right now.
Right. It worries me that you're taking like a metaphysical view on a lot of this stuff. I find you to have a very religious oriented positions on this, and we'll talk about it later. As soon as you said ontologically objective, I got kind of scared coming from an atheist, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay. And please know that, just like trans people are not a monolith of views and ideas, neither are atheists, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. It's just, it worries me when people are using certain frameworks, but they're going to claim empirics on like methodological naturalism or something, but they have metaphysical views that might conflict with that. I find it strange to have an epistemology that might be in contention with your ontology. or at least your metaphysical ontological beliefs.
Okay, we'll see you, Zoe. See you, everybody.
What the shit?
Thanks for hanging out in live stream. I don't know if that was productive or not. I think so. We understand each other better. Zoe is very philosophical. We had some agreement, but very little. I wish Doug would have asked Zoe how many personalities they include and how many are men and women. Yeah, well, I really do need to go. But thanks for hanging out. I can't believe it. Oh, no, it's only 2.5. I thought it was 3 hours. Only 2.5. 2.5 is still too long. Anyhow, take care, guys. Have a great rest of your weekend.